like it's a multiple reset day.
Yeah.
And I think once we understand that that's what it is, we can just kind of enjoy our coffee for the third time.
Yeah, like Groundhog's Day. Here we
Groundhog's
go.
Day, yeah. Okay, reset. Sometimes he gets all like, angry and mad, and other times he's like, yep, this is what happens next.
Yep. Yeah. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, me too. Well, hello. I am Erica Hunsinger, and this is In the Act. In the Act is a program on creativity and the creative life, and we are broadcasting from the studios at Mead Public Library in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And today's guest on In the Act is Heather Cleveland. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
And I'm really excited to have you on. And I know tiny little bits and pieces of your life, which is, like I know you a little bit, like we're acquaintances and respect and think you're fantastic. But I don't really know much about you. And I was wondering if you could sort of introduce yourself to us.
So I'll give you a little background.
Yeah.
As far as like a bit of my journey.
Yes.
So I grew up in Appleton, and after I graduated from high school, 1 year, and I went to UW-Milwaukee for college, I decided that, and I think this is a really important part of my journey. I mean, I've had multiple like aha moments, and this is a big one for me. A year after I graduated from high school, I joined the military. And part of it was, and not that I was excited about war or things like that, I knew that I needed structure and something bigger.
Yeah.
And I wish there was other alternatives because I don't think the military necessarily fit me. It did in some ways and not in others.
Yeah.
So I joined the military when I was 19.
Wow.
And then I, right around just before then, my 20th birthday, I went to basic training in Fort Leonard Wood.
Where's Fort Leonard Wood?
It's in Missouri.
Okay.
And that was 9 weeks, and I built a lot of character during that time. And truly, what I appreciated about it is I met people from around the country.
Yes.
That came to that place from varying circumstances. And at that point, I had hardly left Appleton, where I grew up.
Wow.
I didn't know other people from other circumstances. And so met so many people, so many circumstances from around the country. And we were all put together, and we were stripped down and then built back up. And it was what I was looking for. And somebody other than your parents or your teachers to tell you and hold you accountable.
Sure.
And to talk with you about values and decision-making and teamwork.
Huge.
So
Yes.
built great character in me. And I didn't, and it grew in me since then, since I was, that was when I was 20.
Wow.
And so after that, I went.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
What, in that note, when you said, I knew I needed structure,
Mm-hmm.
I think that those are pivotal and abstract experiences to have as a young person or as a person in general.
Mm-hmm.
What were the things that came to play, like that you put those pieces together for yourself? Because I think those are hinge moments that you're talking about that I kind of want to just dissect a tiny bit if you could.
No, please do, because I continue to see it in other young people. And I try to help lean into it. And it's a lack of direction. So I remember being in high school, and going through the motions, or even before that, going through the motions, and you're taking your classes and you're striving to get a good grade, but it's actually, that's not the end. The grade isn't the end. And I feel like we're not doing enough of like, why are we doing what we're doing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sure.
And
Yep.
so in high school, I had a conversation probably with a guidance counselor, and then I had a conversation with a friend, talking about what are you going to do next. And I mentioned a couple things that I'm interested in, and civil engineering came up. And actually, this is another quick side story.
Sure.
I was in trig class, trigonometry, and this was my junior year, and the teacher, and this was another kind of like pivot for me, like this thing, and you never know what it's going to be.
Exactly.
And so the teacher handed out a flyer for Society of Women's Engineering from UW-Madison was putting on a week-long camp for women. I know. And so engineering was a little bit already on my mind because I had this conversation and then I had this opportunity. So I went to UW-Madison. I stayed in the dorms. Mind you, I'd had no exposure. I'm a first-generation college student.
Wow.
And I got to learn about, in laboratories and lectures and these kind of things, all the different types of engineering. And that's when I chose civil engineering.
Wow.
And it was because and this is still true in my life, which I love to see how it's evolved for me, because now one of my taglines is adding people to the equation. But I chose civil engineering because it had to do with people. And so I chose that, went to UW-Milwaukee for civil engineering. And so that was another kind of like pivotal moment for that. So, but being...
And can you explain what civil engineering is then for people, for me too?
Sure.
But
so my emphasis, it's interesting how in different engineering, for example, there's mechanical, there's civil, there's electrical, but under civil, there's subsets even.
Right.
So my focus was environmental and water resources. Then I went on in my role with remediation and waste management, so designing landfills and things like that. But it can also include wastewater treatment, potable water, water management, all those types of things. So it can be very small, like under a microscope, or it could be a watershed.
Right.
So that's... And then there's also geotechnical that has to do with soil. Transportation is another type of engineering under civil.
Sure.
So, but mine was environmental and water resources.
Wow, thank you. That's really
you're welcome.
helpful. Okay.
Yeah, but it was interesting how going through school, we never dug into that. And that's another thing, looking back, when I'm like, do you know why you're going to school?
Right.
Can you tie it to, and now fast forward kind of a whole bunch, in working in urban planning, it's like urban planning affects everybody's life every single day.
Absolutely.
So I would love for more youth to be involved in those conversations.
Right.
So back to the military part of it, that pivotal moment, it was my first year of college and my first year on my own. And it just felt very wild. It felt very like balance between party, trying to make friends, going to class. And it was like this, and I'm like, gosh, there's got to be something. I just couldn't, and I knew that I couldn't find it within myself, or I didn't know how.
Yeah.
And I mean, I say this often, but I couldn't lock it up. I
Yeah.
couldn't, and I knew I had it in me to do better, and I just couldn't figure out how to organize myself to do better.
Right.
Yeah, so that
totally makes sense.
Yeah, so I
Sure.
signed up after my freshman year. I believe it was June after my freshman year is when I signed up.
Were you scared, or did you feel empowered?
I felt empowered immediately.
Right.
And then I remember talking to my grandma at that time, and I told her about it, and she said, I like people who make decisions. And that always stayed with me, because I also like people that make decisions.
Wow.
So I knew that I had made a decision, and I was going to do it. And I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it woke something up inside me, and that's what I was looking for. And also, like, you couldn't leave. There was no like, oh, I don't feel like doing this today.
Right.
It's like, you're doing this every day.
Yeah.
So that was a big part. That was a big part. And so I'm just going to fast forward a little bit, and we can go stop at any time, or,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love this. I can, like, as an aside, while we're in this like little moment
Sure.
I have this tiny little dream where I totally think that it should be imperative for kids after high school to have a 2-year, like, everyone who goes to school, like, has to go into this, not military, but like this
community service.
So they're put into other places in the country with people of different gender, races, different living situations, areas, city, rural, to get experience with a group of people their age, but then help the community there, so that they're not only giving back to others that they don't know and finding that sort of relationship to people in general, but to broaden their horizons to, quote unquote, like the other. And I think it's so necessary for us to be more engaged with the other.
I completely agree.
In that
and
way.
I would love, and it would take a lot of organization and focus.
Yeah.
And I think why that's not happening is the ROI, the return on investment on it, is so far out. And that's something that we're struggling with as a community and a society.
Sure.
So we put it in, and what we get out is later, but I completely agree with you. And then I'm going to fast forward just a bit to my experience, because I've seen it work.
Yes.
What you're describing, and just like this small piece of it is my work with Engineers Without Borders.
Absolutely.
With UW-Milwaukee, my first trip to Guatemala was in 2010. And then I traveled 8 times and taught the Sustainable Methods class, and that was a course that my good friend Marissa created, and she left to go to DC, so I taught it. And it was bringing the students into a real world situation where they designed a gravity-fed water distribution system for people in Guatemala in the highlands. But part of that, part of what we are talking about, like the other and appreciating other people. What was really neat about this class, and having gone through engineering and having a degree, is that you couldn't just think about the equations. You had to think about the people and how this would impact them, and what their resources are.
Absolutely.
And then part of it too was presenting to them alternatives. Here are the alternatives, and looking at the budgets, and also that not always the cheapest is the one that you should be choosing. It's all part of this conversation. So that was a part of this course.
Wow.
It's also part of the experience for college students in Engineers Without Borders. And I've seen it change lives many, many times. And so not only being part of that design and then seeing it built, because it was interesting to see the look on their faces, or even ours, like, oh my gosh, here we go again, of like, okay, this is what it looks like on the paper. Yeah. And here's what it looks like on the mountain.
Yes.
And that brake pressure tank is on the other side of the road than what we anticipated. So like now we have to run the numbers. Is that okay? Does anything have to change because the pressure could change? So the pipe rating might have to change, or so it was like, but them kind of like, oh, this isn't a homework assignment. This is real. And so not only, so having so many experiences. So what you mentioned, a 2-year experience, being outside of yourself, working with others, that's real. That's real learning, real experience, real character building. And I think I would love for that opportunity to exist.
Yeah. I mean, and I think of like the WPA, right? Like the men that was, I don't know, was it Roosevelt who did that?
I think so. And I forget the name of it, but I know it was a program.
But there was a program. And
the parks.
Right. And so the parks were built, and the pathways and paintings. And, it was such a, I think, fervent time and created such wealth of our nation's character for that. But, anyway, that's...
Yeah,
so that's, and I think that sometimes it's hard too, because life isn't linear, and because it's not an equation, and like some of those things can get figured out, but some of them can't in that sort of linear way. And then how do you troubleshoot, because the piece is on the other side of the mountain,
Right. Oh, I know.
That's when
right.
the creativity kicks in.
Yeah.
Like, here you have all the tools, you have the knowledge. Now, what can we do with that? Because you've moved towards things that you love. You're growing this and building this thing, and now there's a mistake or an accident or problem, and now how do you recover? How do you respond to it? And
as a team,
Absolutely.
So the idea, like when young people are doing homework, whether it's in high school or college, and it being all by yourself, and I've seen it too when I work with young people in the workplace, they try to do it all by themselves. I'm like, oh, no. I'm here to talk about it with you. And there's no way you would just know this answer. That's not actually how it works. So seeing that, and like, let's be resourceful. Let's be thoughtful. Also, let's work with the people in Guatemala, because they have a lot of knowledge.
Right.
They have this authentic knowledge of the land, of what they've seen. And so that's another, like, oftentimes there's multiple discussions amongst the group of students with the Guatemalans, and then this kind of,
there has to be,
so it's
right?
beautiful.
Doesn't that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah.
And I love that, that you're modeling an experience of not the pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I can do it on my own. There's a real tension and inflexibility to that sort of character that we have upheld in this country, that we have to do it alone, and we go it alone, and that and of course there are people that have had to do that, and but most of us are buoyed by the people around us that we have created, either family or or friends or business partnerings that help us along the way in the journey.
Yeah, I wouldn't be where I am today without people around me.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll continue on with my journey. So went through basic training. It was interesting, I could feel that made me bolder. Like you said, was I afraid? It was like that fired something inside me to know that I would be okay.
Yeah.
And so fast forward a couple more years, I packed my car up. I had just turned 21, and I know I had gone through basic training and AIT, and
What's
I drove
AIT?
Advanced Individual Training.
Okay.
And that's when I went for training to be a truck driver. I know. That was another character building experience. And I chose truck driving because it was the shortest AIT. It was 6 weeks. And I think part of me thought, this is going to be an adventure. This is something that I never thought about. And so that's what I went to. Yeah, that's what I learned.
Wow. It's on my bucket list to learn how to drive a Peterbilt, just in like it's a good goal. I totally want to do it.
Because it's like, whoa, this is huge. Yeah. So that's how it felt.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. It is awesome.
Yeah.
And so kind of this, it was really cool. So went to school went AIT, it was like school. And then came back to Milwaukee and felt this need, now that I'd been somewhere else, I knew I wanted to continue to push myself. And so I packed my car and I drove it to Boston, Massachusetts for a co-op. So I had a co-op, and this is where, and it was interesting. This was another little tip that I got from someone, which I thought was so great. And that when things aren't advertised or like told to you and like suddenly you hear this creative way. So I was working in a class. This was when I was going to school for civil engineering at UW-Milwaukee. And I was looking for a co-op or an internship, and I just wasn't finding anything. It's very competitive because there's multiple engineering schools in Milwaukee. There's Marquette, MSOE, and UW-Milwaukee. So it's like we're all trying to get these experiences.
Sure.
And so a non-traditional student said, Heather, you should go and look at the list of, it's like a vetted list or a contract list of consultants that the state works with and call them. Sure enough, I called all of them, or at least a whole bunch. And I cold called them and said, hey, I'm looking for this opportunity for an internship. I'll send you my resume. And this is like the beginning of email. So I can't remember if I emailed it or if I mailed it. And then I got this internship because somebody was like, oh, sure, you could come work here. So I worked at Edwards and Kelsey. And I worked in the transportation department, and it was interesting because look at what I'm doing now, like with bicycle.
Totally.
But then what the transportation engineering was about was like car lanes, turning lanes, and just I didn't love it. And so
in Boston, I mean, in general,
So but this was in Milwaukee.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
okay.
yeah, but this was in Milwaukee.
Okay,
yes,
okay.
but what I loved about it, and I knew right away, I looked to see Edwards and Kelsey. Do they have offices other places?
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
So because I wanted to get back to how Boston, how did that happen? So I wanted to have different experience. I didn't even necessarily care what the experience was. I just wanted something different,
Sure.
And
absolutely.
so Boston was something that was on my radar. It was a different office. It was a bigger city. Really knew nothing about it. So drove out there, and I ended up, fast forward a bunch, I ended up transferring to the Boston office, and then I was in telecommunications. And this is when this was a booming industry. So putting the towers on places, things like that. And so we had huge,
oh my gosh.
That was a big part of what we did. And I was an intern. So I made copies and I did small things, but still there was a lot of work to be had at that time in that field. And I worked with a lot of structural engineers because they were putting these towers on top of buildings and whatnot.
Yeah.
Not eventually where I wanted to be, but I met some really great people. A really good friend of mine who lives in Amsterdam. I have since visited him a couple times, which again influenced my, bicycle,
for sure,
passion.
Yeah.
And that was another pivotal moment of like moving to Boston. And so I lived, so I moved to Boston. Mind you, I'm in the military. I was in Boston for several years. I went to Wentworth Institute of Technology, and that was a really cool opportunity because going to UW-Milwaukee, I remember going to my 8 a.m. class, chemistry class, let's say, and there's 100 people in there.
Yeah.
Shifting to, I'm now with my whole class is like 30 people.
Sure.
I thrived.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, leaving that that's what I needed as a person, as like that a bit more individual attention, a bit more relationship building, team, rather than just kind of going through the motions and getting it done. So I thrived there, but fast forward a little bit more, 9/11 happened, and then I went on to serve and was activated and went to Iraq. Yep.
Wow.
And so that was another big part of my journey. And again, when, I wasn't afraid, I was ready, but I was sad, because I knew this was going to change my life, and it did.
Yeah.
So in February of 2003, we went to Fort Drum, which is upstate New York. My whole company, which is the 1058th out of Hingham, Massachusetts, truck driving company.
Wow.
88 Mike is our MOS. And then
what is MOS?
MOS, it's like your job description.
Gotcha,
and I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's your job.
Okay.
And anyone in the military is going to say like, oh, I can't believe she doesn't remember that.
I know, right?
Including my sister. Yeah. And I went to, it was a really fascinating training. And this was the beginning of everything. So before war was declared, we were in Fort Drum, and we watched it on the TV as war was declared. Wow. And it was really a fascinating experience being there. And these barracks that we stayed in were built for World War II. So they're very, very old, for them to still be standing. But they were still standing. It was, it was fine. But it was so cold. And so we're training in these ranges, and our noses are getting stuck to the metal. And on the back of our weapons, our M16s, as we're, getting everything ready. And then to go to the desert. And that's what we did. Yeah. So in February of 2003, we were in Fort Drum. And then April that same year, we were in Iraq.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I was in Iraq for a year.
Wow.
Yep. And what I really appreciate...
In a combat zone then.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And we were there before anything was established. So this is another, and I remember when I was there, we would have like kind of, I don't know, like these pools where we'd pick, okay, this is the date that we're going home, I remember thinking I had picked a date for October. Oh, we'll be home for Halloween, and this is what I'm going to dress as. But no, soon around that time, I think, is when they said, nope, it's a year. Yeah. And that, I think there was something about when that happened that we could kind of calm down and know, okay, because in the beginning we didn't know, was this quick? We were going to go right home because no one knew. Right. And so then we were there for a year. So I was there from April 2003 to April 2004. Wow. And again, I like to call it like anthropological studies. So I really got to study humanity and how people react and what was happening there. And that was another significant experience for me.
Yeah. Welcome back to In the Act. I'm Erica Hunsinger. We're here with Heather Cleveland. Hi.
Hello.
You were just talking about not knowing when you were going to return home and playing like a hope game.
Yeah.
Or a kind of game to attach meaning to when you could go home.
So we could start the countdown.
You could start, right. And to then know that the knowing is so much easier than the not knowing.
Right.
In almost every situation. Even if it's bad news.
Correct.
Like knowing is better than not knowing.
Yeah.
And that's why I have such trouble with secrets and all that stuff too.
Yeah.
But that is a jumping off point, I think, to get back into. So you were in Iraq for a year in combat, and you were driving trucks.
Yep, and we were convoy security. So something that I appreciate about my opportunity being a truck driver, and others stayed on their bases the whole time and maybe didn't get to see, but I got to see the whole country. And I feel really blessed to have that opportunity. So we drove all the way to Mosul, which is northern Iraq, and then we would go all the way south to Kuwait. And oftentimes we were picking up supplies in Kuwait and then driving all the way up north. And we were convoy security. Wow. So escorting tractor trailers with supplies or escorting other military vehicles and things like that whether they were moving or transitioning or things like that. And then we went to
So the anxiety involved in being the transport security is pretty intense, I would think.
It was significant.
Yeah.
But there's also something about when you when you look inside yourself and you find peace and calm and you get up every day. And I felt like I found a switch in myself and I flipped it, and I call it like the movie mode, where you're kind of like a little bit separate. Obviously,
a little bit detached.
A little bit detached, yep.
Yeah.
And because there were moments that were really intense, and if you thought about it too much, you would not be okay.
Right. Yep.
But I kept and I made great friends there, and with I really leaned on them and had great conversations, and then we had a lot of camaraderie.
Yeah.
A lot of laughing.
Right.
So if we got stuck somewhere,
experience,
if we got stuck somewhere for a week and we played a lot of cards, we laughed a lot, we just made the most of everything. And I think again that was an example of building character, learning a lot, meeting people from throughout not only the country but the world.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity multiple times to meet, for example, translators in Iraq, and it was really fascinating asking them about, what do you think about us being here and these kind of things, and also we got to see the whole country. That was another fascinating thing. Let me fast forward a little bit further out of that, because that experience, I could talk all day about that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, but here's another interesting
Thank you for holding that space for that time too. Yeah.
And so I was in Iraq for a year. I was a truck driver. I did all sorts of things there. Now fast forward a bunch. I got my first job as an engineer after I graduated, and I worked for Earth Tech, which then transitioned to AECom, and that's an engineering consulting firm in Sheboygan. And I should say around this time, how did I come to Sheboygan? So I was in Boston.
It's a vortex?
I
don't know what happened.
So I was in Boston, and I was with my partner at the time, which I'm no longer with, and he was going to go to school in Green Bay, and then he chose Wisconsin because it had a good program, and then I was like, well, if you do that, then I'm going to go back to school at Milwaukee, where I started, and so Sheboygan was right in the middle.
Right.
And my dad looked at houses on the internet that we found. So we found, this is the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he went and looked at them, and we bought one of those houses and moved here. Yeah. And so I got a job at an engineering consulting firm, and I was an environmental technician. And this is why I was, working to finish my civil engineering degree.
Okay.
And
master's degree.
No, this is still my bachelor's.
Okay.
So my bachelor's took 10 years.
Because of all the
action.
Wow.
But I feel grateful.
Absolutely.
Because when I finished,
I think that's so important to say.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 years it's good for you.
It was great because I got out of it.
Yep.
And I was green in some ways, but in other ways I wasn't.
Yes.
And it was really interesting for me.
Cool.
Yeah. And so now back to making the connection, once I graduated in December of 2007, and then went on to work at Earth Tech, and I was in the waste management department, which I loved. It was a really tight group, and regulations for landfills were established in the late 1970s, early 1980s. So this was a fairly new concept.
Sure.
So previously our practice here. So sometimes I think here we think, we do so many good things and we know everything, but it's like, we just started this.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are still realizing the consequences of our actions.
Right,
so previously, quick side tangent, we had filled quarries or things like that, and we called them dumps.
Yes.
Well, then what would happen is the chemicals or the methane or the groundwater would be impacted, all these things. It was kind of, at that time, it was out of sight, out of mind, or we build a road on top of it. Well, an example of something that would happen is methane would leach through the bedrock and cause an explosion at a house in the vicinity. And so not only was I part of designing new landfills, but also creating gas extraction systems for existing landfills that didn't have liners, because that wasn't our practice. It was, again, out of sight, out of mind.
Yes.
And the explosive range for methane is in a range that is it's low. So you don't have to have a high concentration to have an explosion.
Wow.
Yeah. And
did not know that.
Yeah. And so anyway, went on to go work in that department. Because I was an environmental technician, I still did work with environmental remediation, things like that. So groundwater samples, soil samples, those. So I still did that work, but my new world was waste management. And because now I'm AECOM is
I don't know what that means.
AECOM is a global company. So AECOM is a company. So because AECOM, formerly Earth Tech, is a global company, I got to work on these huge projects. And one of them, so I'll get to the connection, is was a solid waste management master plan for Anbar province in Iraq.
Wow.
And I was like, how is this happening to me? How, what a again, a blessing to be able to. And so when I was there, and I mentioned how I drove all over, I saw the waste. I saw that was just piled up and blowing everywhere. But here's another thing that happened to me as I was working on that project. We went right to, and this is like, so I'm a civil engineer, right? And I help with, for example, leachate management. So when the leachate is generated, how does it flow out?
I don't know what leachate is.
So leachate is the liquid that's generated from waste.
Okay.
So if you have leachate on top of the landfill liner, which is clay, if you have too much head or depth, it will leak.
Got it.
And so we got to have slopes that help manage that. Then it's pulled out.
Gotcha.
So I was part of helping doing those sort of calculations. And each of us kind of had our specialty. And that's the one that I did the modeling. And then I would review other people's calculations.
Great.
So that very technical things. But when we're looking at a solid waste management master plan for a province in Iraq, I thought we went right to, what they wanted to talk about often was like the technical part of a landfill liner. What I wanted to talk about, I could tell right away because I was there. I'm like, can we talk about how waste is generated? Why are we going straight to the reaction?
Yep.
And so that was another turning point in my life. And somewhere in that time, and then I also had a great opportunity when I worked at AECOM, which again was a global company, which gave me these opportunities to meet other people. I got to work, I had the opportunity to work on 2 sustainability plans for municipalities in Illinois. And that's when I was introduced to the concept of urban planning.
Right.
And what I loved about
it's like
that
kind of coalesced on.
Yeah. And so these couple opportunities, I was like, oh, we're missing something. In engineering, we put our heads down and we're doing the calculations. We're not looking up to like, why are we doing what we're doing?
Right. And you're in this little bubble of like, this is what you do. And this is where you operate. And it's connected, but only in a linear line of next step.
Correct.
And so for you to be thoughtful and have had these experiences that put you into mindset of being proactive within the concept of where your job is sitting in reactive.
Yep.
And trying to make those connections with your superiors and your company is pretty remarkable.
Right. But I think I was ahead. I was ahead.
Yeah.
So I
totally.
Yeah. But also the planners that I worked with were not necessarily in Sheboygan. They were in other places in the world for this particular project, or they were in Chicago. And so it was like, okay, there's something here that I need more of. So meaning like you said, the forward thinking, the planning, and the goal setting. And because we use that language when we were doing the sustainability plans. Because like if you want to reduce, for example, your greenhouse gases as a community, like where can you do that? And then talk to the community and see what's viable. And I just was like, ooh, there's something about that I just love. And again, it was adding the people to the equation. It matched the work that we did in Guatemala.
It usually is.
Yeah.
It usually is.
Yeah.
Add the people to the equation is usually part of like the response needed.
I agree. That's always my response.
Yeah.
They're like,
yeah.
But it makes it hard. It's
yes.
And I don't even think that it's soft, because oftentimes that can be called soft science. And
I really hate that. It really is denigrating and like puts it on a hierarchical thing.
It does.
It feels like to me. But anyway.
Right. But it gets again to the why. Why are we doing this?
Yes.
If you get so focused on the calculation, you've lost the why.
Right.
And I think it is making it more complicated, but also more impactful to really dig into the why.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I had the opportunity. So then, I had this opportunity. It was great. Had these other opportunities. And then that's when I discovered urban planning. And so this time, I had mentioned it took 10 years to finish my civil engineering degree. When I went to school for urban planning, I moved to Milwaukee and I worked part-time and then ended up being let go from AECOM, and I've doubled down focusing on urban planning.
Great.
Because I was like, okay, that first degree took 10 years. This one I'm going to do it in 2, and I'm going to really dig in to this program and this experience and do it different than I did the first time. And I was also ready. Do you know what I mean? Like what I loved about, and I often chat with.
Like hinge moment here too.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you just kind of slipped in there that like you were let go.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big deal.
It was, but I was ready. You know, I'm like, I was at peace with it.
And that's great. But like, you know, when you're let go from a job that's substantial, like it seems, you know, there's for you to have been in the place and set yourself up to be like, yep, it's okay, I'm going to double down on school.
Yeah.
Is super. But it doesn't always happen that way.
No.
But there are so many, you know, when it's like that door is closing. So then how do you create the next spot? And that's where those creative juices come in.
I agree.
Play that you're talking about. So
I agree.
I'm sorry. I had to
no, that's okay.
Sprinkle in these little things.
No, that's good. And also, I felt like it just wasn't a good fit for me anymore. So it's almost like I was somewhere else, you know, thinking about other things. Because I remember I didn't have another planner to work with. You know, it was, and I remember looking into geographic information systems, and that was one of the first classes that I took. And it was almost like a lack of understanding of how this tool could be used. So I remember when I had first started with the company, there was a lot of investment in professional development. Well, as things kind of shifted and there was less bigger projects and things like that, the professional development investment shifted too. And I was like, oh, I'm not done yet. You know, I need to invest more in my direction, myself, and see where I can fit. Yeah. It was interesting too. And I hope, and this is now, right, I've observed all these different leadership styles and management styles, whether it was through the military, through the university, through my variety of jobs.
Absolutely.
And something that I noticed when I was with multiple consulting firms is they thought what was most important to me was making money. And especially when I was hourly, they thought, oh, we're going to give you overtime. Great. And I was like, no, not great. That's not what I want. No. You didn't even ask me. I would rather not have the overtime, have work-life balance, invest, because I think right now you're not even asking me what my aspirations are, and not that it needs to be all about me, but how can we ensure that these align, that what my aspirations are can be beneficial to the company while also being beneficial to me. And there just wasn't that mindset. It was more about percent utilization, productivity, and I'm all about working hard. But if there's not an investment in the person, you eventually, and the longer I did it, you just get burnt out on it.
Of course you do.
Yeah, you just feel squeezed dry.
It's a stupid equation that they're putting forward, whoever they are.
Right. And so I felt that was a shift, and that was happening, and the squeeze was on.
Beautiful way that you described it, though, which I think I'm still trying to learn, and probably lots of us are. But when you're talking about having it align with yourself, with the work-life balance.
Yes.
And investment, I think, is that what you said? Is
yes.
The trifecta. That's a struggle for many of us.
It's like watering a plant. You don't water it, it's going to die.
It's true. But it's in soil.
Oh, soil.
Just put more soil on it.
Yeah, that you've also deprived.
Yeah, exactly.
Dead soil, dead plant.
Right.
Oh, why'd this happen?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, yeah, that was another kind of interesting learning opportunity to me. And then to go to grad school and to double down on it. And then during my time in grad school, I had my first visit to Amsterdam. Yeah. And so interestingly, I'm always learning and trying to evolve and like pay attention and what's going on. So I remember on one of my first trips and this was kind of a cool, ironic thing. When I moved to Milwaukee, I had a pit bull, and so hobo. And so with that, what was tricky about that, and I had come from owning a house in Sheboygan to then renting in Milwaukee, but to find a house that would allow a pit bull was tricky.
Yep.
But I think maybe easier in Milwaukee than other places, but still tricky. One would allow dogs, 2 would allow pit bulls. So I just happened to find a place who allowed dogs, and they didn't have any sort of restrictions on that. And it happened to be in River West. I had no idea, because when I went there for undergrad, we were like in basements, not exploring neighborhoods. And I also think the neighborhood characters had been more developed over that, 15, 20, at that point, 15, 20 years. So I moved to River West, and it was, again, a huge blessing because it's a very active neighborhood, meaning that's where the River West 24 occurs. They have multiple co-ops. I didn't know about any of these things. So to go to school for urban planning and to be in River West and to find my calling as like a people-oriented person, where that's where my place is, like creating community and that kind of thing. It was like, again, this perfect combination of like helping me become who I already was inside.
Yeah. Welcome back to In the Act. I'm Erica Hunsinger. We're here with Heather Cleveland. Finding the person who you are. Like all that culmination to coming back to Milwaukee and to be in River West. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was in River West and I joined every co-op that I could. The only one I didn't join, and I didn't know what cooperatives were. And around the same time when I left is when Goodside Grocery had just started. I think it started and I had left because I went to school in 2011. And I'm pretty sure Goodside Grocery started around that time, maybe 2010. And so I was just beginning to learn about it, Oh, I'd never heard of this. And then come to Milwaukee, and I was part of the bookstore cooperative.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I was part of the food cooperative. And then there was also a beer cooperative, which I did not join, but that's the one I was missing. There might have been another one that I'm thinking of. But to be part of, and then I remember when I met Adam, my now husband, and I think this was new. Like I was talking to him about all my things, and he said, "Well, why?" And it was a good question because I never asked it. I just when I saw it and I saw how it worked, I'm like, yes. He asked me
the cooperatives.
Cooperatives, yeah. Yep. He said, "Why would you join a cooperative?" And I said, thanks for asking me that. I've never had to explain it before, but how I try to explain it is like you're part of a group, So like let's say you shop at a really large store.
Yeah.
And who maybe doesn't have a connection to the community and who doesn't take your voice into consideration. An example of that, there was, and this is at one of the food cooperatives in Milwaukee, they were carrying a certain product and people felt like the values of that product and what was happening at that manufacturer of that product didn't agree with them. And so they said, we can't carry that product. So it was like, oh, very interesting. So more values based and more like opinion on it. Right. And another thing that I love about it is looks to the local community and what they have to offer first with respect to their products and produce and things like that. So it's like,
and
wow, this is
like sustaining the members of the community, the farmers that are growing.
And building community through activities and conversations. And because again, I think what I'm seeing over and over is that it's more than just the bottom line, that has value. And it might be intangible, that conversation or that field trip to the farm or that appreciation, but that still has value. And I feel like just because we can't measure it precisely doesn't mean it isn't there.
Right. But everything is down to an equation.
I know.
Right.
I know.
In so many, in everything, it's like permeated our culture. And if it doesn't come down to like this linear equation that makes sense in this mathematical way, in this real cognitive way, that it doesn't have value.
Right.
And it is fascinating to me that people attach value to money in a way that lose it. That's not where the value is. The value is in people. The value is in each other. It's caretaking and love and experience.
I completely agree. And that realization helped, like, as I was having these different experiences personally and around me, I realized this more and more, which has helped me take the path that I've taken. And I'll also say another experience that I have that helped bring me to where I am today is, so when I drove to Milwaukee and, I was moving to my apartment in River West, I saw this person on their bicycle dodging through traffic, looking really cool. And I said, I want to be that person. I just knew I didn't, I hadn't been to Amsterdam, but I had always kind of dabbled in the idea of bicycle. But when there isn't a community, it's harder just to get it off the ground. And so, but in Milwaukee, there is a community.
Yeah.
So then it just so happened that I became very good friends with, in grad school, a person, Kate, who didn't have a car. And I was like, oh, when you meet someone and it's like, okay, I found inspiration in that. So that first year of grad school, practiced not having a car. I was so inspired. I was inspired by that person that I saw who I ended up.
Practiced not having a car. I'm just repeating that.
Oh,
okay.
no, that's good. Because I would only use it on Sundays. And keep in mind, I had a pit bull. So I had to figure out, how do I take Hobo to his vet appointment? And so I signed up for Zipcar, and so I practiced making these things work. And sure enough, after a year, I sold my car and rode my bicycle. And this was funny. So I was so new. And I remember the first time I rode my bicycle from River West to the east side of Milwaukee to campus. I had no light. I had no helmet. I was like, it was so uncomfortable. And I knew it. I was like, oh, clonking around. I was scared, scared-ish, it just felt very uncomfortable. But I said, I'm not giving up. And so I just kept, then I practiced not having a car, and then I didn't have a car. Like I could feel a shift inside myself of like that leveling up,
Yeah.
And then I had this bike. It was a road bike. I couldn't put a rack on it. I couldn't put a fender on it. So I was constantly like sweaty from my backpack and dirty from not having a fender.
Right.
So now, and then also during grad school, so I sold my car and then I went to Amsterdam. And I saw...
And what was Amsterdam like?
Oh, I got off of the train. Number one, I took a train.
Yep.
And I just sat there and enjoyed it. And it was wonderful. And I got off the train. My friend picked me up or met me there. And there was a triple-decker floating bike rack. Huge in the canal.
Wow.
And I was like, I've never seen anything like this, obviously. Not in Appleton, not Milwaukee.
No.
Now I'm in Amsterdam.
Right.
And so there are bicycles everywhere.
That's how people get around, right?
There's the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So it's like, and then...
Safety-wise, too.
Yeah. And so at this time, I was still working for AECom. And again, this is another blessing of the global company piece of it. They had an office in Amsterdam. So I met an architect. So they had only 3 people, I think, in that office. And it was a shared office kind of opportunity. So I got to go work there, and I worked on a couple things, but I also got to meet some colleagues, and that was also wonderful. So they took me around on the bicycle and showed me different things and architectural things. Yeah. And so I really got to this increased appreciation for bicycle infrastructure, what it could be like, what the life would look like. I even remember seeing kids being brought to school on this, like, cargo bike with the 6 kids in front of it, and they're being like, but this is normal in the rain.
Right.
Like, this is normal.
Yes.
And so I know we're not going to be Amsterdam, but I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I started Green Bicycle Company to add people to the equation, and also to have a small piece of the bicycle infrastructure and culture that I saw in Amsterdam and that I experienced in Milwaukee.
Wow.
Yeah, because when I lived in Milwaukee and I biked around and I did the underwear bike ride, I just loved it. So I was in my darn underwear, and it was so liberating. I don't know if we can do that in Sheboygan. We'll see. I did the River West 24, and that was a relay race. It was a 24-hour bike ride. 6 of us were on a team. I formed a team, a couple people that I knew, actually a few people. One was from Sheboygan, Kimber. She was on our team. And one of her friends.
Kimberly or Kimber?
Kimberly Johnson.
Yeah, it was? Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
She was on our team. I know.
Awesome.
And because I used to work with her sister. So we knew each other. And yeah, so that.
Oh, because her sister's water stuff. Too.
Yeah. And so we worked together at AECom. Mm-hmm. I know. Isn't that cool?
Wow.
So somehow I had sent out this feeler, who would like to join us? And so Kimber joined us. One of her friends joined us. And then I put a call out somewhere. Hey, it was probably some bicycle group from Milwaukee. Hey, I'm looking for a few women to join our team.
Yeah.
A few people joined, and then somebody else joined our team. And we ended up staying at her apartment, which was on Humboldt. And then 2 other people who I'd never met joined our team. So we had, and we were called, it was something Venus. And yeah. And so I don't know, it was this great, like, again, we were riding bikes and that was a cool part, right? But when you bike with somebody for 24 hours and you're like sleeping in between and you're sharing snacks and watching everything, that's the community building that I felt there. And so back to starting Green Bicycle Company, and now it's like you've experienced some of the things that we've been coordinating, and it's to build that community,
Right.
and what I felt in Milwaukee, and when you're doing a bike ride together for whatever period of time, you just start to share those in-betweens. Like, hey, what kind of rack do you have? Or, hey,
The in-betweens.
yeah, have you ever gone on this route? It's really good. Or, hey, I didn't even know this existed, because I remember one of our underwear bike rides was to the Milwaukee Domes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it was like, what was cool about that is I had never been there. Oh, I had never been there at that time. I'd been there since. I'd never been there at night, and they're beautiful.
Yeah.
And then you're also discovering the paths to get there that other people take that I had never taken, because I had never
Right.
done that.
Right.
So
it's shared experiences.
shared experiences.
Teaching each other different routes.
Yeah. And then another piece of my
It's
journey.
lovely.
Yeah. Another piece of my journey that we didn't touch on yet is my time in nonprofits and with Nourish.
Yes.
So I went to school for civil engineering. I went to school for urban planning. After urban planning, looked really hard for a job again. I was in Milwaukee. There's so many universities. There's so many people,
Yeah.
passionate, educated. I really struggled to find a job. I worked at Sendix in between, and I thought I could do anything, but I struggled. I struggled when it came like the holidays and Christmas trees and Santas, and it was just like so intense. And I was like, oh goodness, I need to do something else. So I remember saying to Adam, okay, I got to step back from this. I got to see what else is out there.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, so one door closes, another one opens.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a posting for a job opportunity. It was the food justice director for Nourish.
Oh my gosh. I mean, okay. So many of these things are like putting yourself in the right place for luck to happen.
Yes.
Like setting yourself up for luck.
Mhm.
Like
Having
keeping
faith.
your eyes open, having faith, and really, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And so that's,
Wow.
I know so many times it's like, okay, yeah, just do it. It's
Yeah.
going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so I saw that job, I applied for it, and I had applied for so many jobs. I remember when my mom was looking for a job, and I shared with her all my rejections because she was feeling pretty bad about it.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, here, you want to see my rejections? No worries. Just keep applying.
Yeah. Right.
Although I was like totally depressed about it.
Of
It was really
course.
hard.
Yeah.
And then
And it's important to talk about it, and it's important to share about
Yeah.
it. And it's important to get support around those things so that you can be buoyed, so that you
Yeah.
can keep trying.
and you're not alone.
And you're not alone. And that's such a great message I just want to throw out there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so applied for the job at Nourish. And after applying for so many jobs and not hearing anything or rejections or things like that, I knew a part of it. And I think I had said to Adam at the time, they don't know who I am. They've never met me. You know, I'm a paper, but there's so many papers. There's so
Yeah.
many resumes and
Right.
cover letters. And, so applied to Nourish, got an email back 10 minutes later. I knew the person who was hiring. She'd met me because I bartended at Urbane, which I
Nice.
loved.
Nice.
Because when I was doing my environmental technician work, I said, okay, enough of this part-time business. I'm going full-time back to school so I can finish. And I got the job bartending at Urbane, which I loved. What I loved about it too is I was working in these engineering consulting firms with people who weren't necessarily social. And I needed those conversations.
Yeah.
And so I really loved that balance when I worked at Urbane, is having those conversations with people and practicing that part of me.
Absolutely.
Like with people I didn't know. Like,
Yep.
hey, how are you? How's it going? What's new?
Right.
What can I get for you?
Yeah.
That kind of thing, which isn't
Absolutely.
part of the engineering world.
Right.
So that helped practice that skill. So worked at Urbane during that time. I forgot where I was.
That's okay. You were at Nourish and you
I was
knew
at
the
Nourish. I
person.
applied. So the person who emailed back, she met me when I was a bartender at Urbane and knew that I was a hard worker and that I cared a ton.
You just
and
never know.
No, you just never know. Yeah. So ended up, then we moved back to Sheboygan. I worked at Nourish for 6 years, went on to become the executive director. We moved from a program inside SEIO to now it's its own organization.
Yes.
13-acre with a farm in Sheboygan Falls.
Amazing.
And the really cool part about that experience, there's so many, and I called that part of my life the School of Hard Knocks, because I had to learn how to run payroll. I had to learn how to organize fundraisers. I had to learn how to build a program from scratch. All these things, how to organize volunteers. I had, pieces of those skills within me, but had never done something exactly like that.
Yeah.
And then I was in charge of it. And so now fast forward a bunch, when I started Green Bicycle Company, I was able to tap into all of those experiences to have my own business.
Absolutely.
And to remodel a building and and do my own thing. And then you had mentioned earlier about the values piece of it.
Yes.
I remember saying at a job that I had in between, knowing, and I was there for 6 months, and it was like, oh, something about this doesn't match my values. And so I was able to identify those situations quicker of like, oop, this doesn't align with me. And even for some projects, and not that it's bad, it's just like, oop, this isn't aligning with the direction that I'm going. I can feel the friction of it.
Yes.
When we're aligned, we're going to go so much further.
Yes.
But I remember even some projects now, fast forward, with Green Bicycle Company, when we're looking at putting proposals together, if we find a whole bunch of friction, we kind of dig into why. And it might be that it just doesn't align with what, if it's not radically including people, it probably isn't going to align with us in the work that we do, because it's going through the motions, it's this kind of thing. But if it's not including people and significant outreach, radical inclusion, oop, I don't think that's going to be a good fit.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So Green Bicycle Company houses so many different programs, though, and ideas and experiences and potentials, right? Because it's a retail shop.
Yep.
With clothing and bikes and puzzles and reusables.
Yeah.
And then workshops and outreach programs, like you name it.
Yeah. So to me, when I worked at several consulting firms, and I felt when I was working for the consulting firms, it felt like no one knew what we did. And we worked on significant projects, but it was there wasn't a space to have the overlap with the community, like on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I also appreciate retail. And, when I was looking for my bike, I was looking for the equipment to go with it, the pannier bag, the cool helmet. I was looking for supplies to make my own kombucha.
Yeah.
I wanted to share a great selection of books for us to prompt conversations. And it was like, okay, here's a way that these two can intersect and break down those silos.
Right.
So a customer might become a client because, hey, I have this project, or I know somebody who's working on something.
Right.
So that's kind of the idea with that. And then the experience piece of it is to stimulate, again, that conversation, that experience. And it doesn't always have to be about Green Bicycle Company or bicycling.
Yeah.
It could be, for example, a women's film festival and then celebrating some books, or it could be a fermentation fest. That's another one that I love to do.
Yeah.
But these different experiences, because I felt like when I was with the nonprofit or when I was with the consulting firm, that community development piece of it and bringing people together to learn and experience was a bit missing, at least for me in my life. So I want to be a part of helping organize that, also to bring back to Sheboygan some of that experience that I had in Milwaukee.
Right. Well, and I think that sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their heads around something that's not just a wholly defined little nugget.
Right.
But that to have your expansive history dedicated to people and the environment and better living and moving towards more sustainability for self and other for our world is really beautiful. And it's so exciting. I feel like we could talk for so long. You have so much rich, beautiful information to share and to connect, and feel very privileged to have you in the community and to be a part with you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to say? Any last bits?
I'll just say that starting Green Bicycle Company and the leap of faith that it's taken and still takes to continue to do it feels it's my expression. It's me sharing. I feel very raw doing it. It's me sharing who I am and everything that I've learned with the community. And that can be scary some days, but other days it's completely liberating and awesome. And I would say that's most of the time, and that's what keeps me going. And I appreciate all the support from the community that I've gotten so far. And I think it's just the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And if people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they connect with you?
They can check out our website. They can find my information there. So greenbicycleco.com, or you can contact me via email at heather@greenbicycleco.com.
Great. Excellent. Thanks so much, Heather.
You're welcome.
In the Act is produced in the studios at Mead Public Library in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. More information on the web at meadpl.org.